This will be a talk about Token Curated Registries. We're going to have a little bit for like the kind of noobs in the room for maybe the first 10 minutes, and then we're going to move on to some more like advanced relevant topics now that there's a TCR live on the mainnet. So I'm just going to talk for like 10 minutes or so, and then Eddie and I are going to like talk together, and it can be like conversational, and if anyone wants to jump in or ask questions, totally cool. We would welcome it and love it. Okay, so we have a token curated registry on the mainnet now as of 2 or 3 weeks ago. So the TCR idea itself is just about 9 months old. I think I published the original paper back in September of 2017, so right on time. We had our baby at its scheduled due date. Who am I? I'm Mike Goldin. I'm a software developer at a company called Consensus, which is putting on this conference. I started out at Consensus as intern number 2 when the company was about 15 people, and I've like watched it grow to the 700+ person behemoth that it is today. And along the way, I wrote this paper called Token Curated Registries and was catapulted from total anonymity to C-list crypto acclaim. So here we are. Eddie here is the Adchain product manager at MetaX. He still toils in relative anonymity, but never forget, you saw him here first. So everybody's talking about TCRs, and I keep waiting for us to reach like the peak of the hype cycle, but it keeps not arriving. So what are they? The most highlighted line in the original Medium post that I wrote about TCRs was this: token curated registries are decentrally curated lists with intrinsic economic incentives for token holders to curate the list's contents judiciously. So it's like a means of creating lists in a decentralized way. That's where we're going to start. Now, what I say when I mean list is what a mathematician would call a set. It's an unordered, unranked list. There are some very promising proposals, which we'll talk about later, for how you can actually do ranked TCRs, but we'll talk about just like the original TCR design, which was for unordered sets. So you're in, you're out in a binary way. There's no ordering or ranking. So this would be like, for example, if there was a list of like the best restaurants in New York City where any restaurant on the list was like good, but none was necessarily much better than the others, or at least that information isn't exposed. Or it could be like membership in a cooperative where either you're in or you're out, but if you're in, you're equal relative to any other member. So I'll describe a simple example of how a TCR works mechanically, and then we'll start getting into some more like subtle properties of TCRs. So how does this work? We have a list of the best restaurants in New York City. If you're a restaurant, you want to be on this list because you'll get more customers. If you're somebody who goes to restaurants, you might want to look at this list because you don't want to waste your time in bad restaurants. So kind of in an abstract sense, we call the restaurants candidates, and we call the people who are referencing the list consumers. So candidates want to be visible to consumers, and consumers want high quality information about what restaurants they should be going to. Then there's a third party we introduce called token holders. Token holders only care about making money. They aren't nice, they aren't charitable, they don't necessarily even care about restaurants, they only care about making money. So how can we leverage the incentives of these three parties, the candidates, consumers, and token holders, to curate a list of high quality? How can we take advantage of the incentives that may exist here? So our list of good restaurants is going to be a token curated registry, which means it has an intrinsic token. There's a specific cryptocurrency associated with this registry. So if a candidate, a restaurant, wants to get onto this list, what it's going to have to do is it's going to have to buy some of the registry's intrinsic token on the market and put down a deposit to initiate an application to the registry. What happens then is token holders look at this application, they ask themselves, would the list be better or worse if this restaurant was included in it? They ask themselves this question because letting bad restaurants onto the list breaks the incentive cycle that creates fundamental demand for the token. So again, restaurants need to acquire the token to make applications for listing. That's where the fundamental demand for the token comes from. But restaurants are only going to do this if consumers are actually looking at the list. Consumers are not going to revisit the list or share it with their friends if they consistently have crappy experiences going to restaurants that are on the list. So if consumers aren't looking at the list, restaurants aren't going to apply, demand for the token goes to zero, token holders want to avoid that. Briefly, like bringing it back to reality here, imagine you like subscribe to a magazine or a service that curates the a list of best restaurants that just consistently disappoints you. you're not going to renew your subscription. You're not going to like keep looking at that list, and eventually it's that magazine or whatever, whoever's doing that curation, they're going to go out of business because they have no subscribers. So anyway, token holders are going to look at this application and they're going to ask themselves, will including this restaurant on our list make the list better or worse? Maybe some token holders go to the restaurant to visit it and report back on what sort of assessment they make. If token holders think that having the restaurant on the list will make the list better, then after the application period expires, the restaurant gets a listing. It keeps its deposit, and if it ever wants to leave the registry, it can just take that deposit out, cash it out, lose its listing, it's fine. They haven't like paid anything. They have like some capital lockup costs, but there's no like arbitrary fees there. If token holders assess that the restaurant is bad, any token holder can make a challenge by putting down a matching deposit in the registry's intrinsic token, and this initiates a token-weighted vote. So in token-weighted voting, it's not one person, one vote, it's one token, one vote. So this means that people with the most exposure to the token's value get greater say in the curation process. People with the most to gain or to lose by the list's curation quality are likely to have the most informed opinions or are going to expend the most effort to develop informed opinions for themselves. Trolls with nothing at stake or with only a small amount at stake are excluded in this way. So that's it. That's a TCR. That was like the original thing that I wrote about in this paper. People are like extending this idea in very interesting ways now, but that's like the original fundamental premise. It's like a system for, staking funds, opening yourself up to challenges, and then if you make it through that challenge process, being listed in some registry. So one interesting property or notable property of this way of list making relative to some others is that it shifts the costs of curation from consumers to candidates. So like if you're subscribing to a magazine to get some list, you're like paying for the curation, right? In this model, the people who want to be visible to consumers pay the cost of curation. That's just something to keep in mind. I think that makes sense since consumers pay, therefore they have leverage. It also allows for like potentially infinite fractalization of preferences. So if we have like a TCR of the best Chinese restaurants in New York, that's never going to mutually satisfy people who prefer either Mandarin or Szechuan cuisine. And so whichever interest group is in the minority there, if they're like just unhappy, they can fork the registry, burn the tokens of the majority, and create a new focal point in a separate registry about the type of information that's meaningful to them. Using TCRs for list curation also gives all parties transparency into who the decision makers are. It's the token holders. It doesn't necessarily give you perfect insight into how decisions are made, but it does let you know who the decision makers are, and you can observe over time what action each individual decision maker takes. You can also do like exotic things with governing these registries, which we'll get into more in just a moment. The very basic thing to do, which I wrote about in the original paper, is just allocate tokens by some means. Didn't express an opinion on it really in the original paper. I don't recall. And then the idea is like the invisible hand of the market is going to move them to whoever can be most productive with them. As Eddie and I are going to tell you next, we do not necessarily observe the invisible hand doing this job incredibly efficiently in practice, so you can experiment with more structured governance systems. You can have continuous token models where just like, for example, the only way to acquire the right to purchase tokens is maybe by accruing wins in a prediction market that tracks whether various applicants will make it onto the registry. So you have to like prove yourself to kind of like see, are you smart enough to make sophisticated assessments? If so, then maybe you can win the right to buy tokens and participate in the curation process. You could also like make non-productive tokens decay in value over time just to like force the invisible hand a little bit to move a little faster. So in the original TCR paper, I was relying a lot on the invisible hand to make the system productive, and I think what we'll spend a good amount of time discussing next is like where we may have been over-optimistic there and how we can build a little more structure into these systems to make them more productive. So start talking with Eddie now, and if you're still confused about how token curated registries work, I would like to remind you, please ask questions at any time in the conversation we're about to have. We're just gonna like riff, we're just gonna talk. This is a curation markets meetup right here. So ask good questions. And also, if you come to the curation markets meetup tomorrow, we are going to be playing Token Curated Registries, the drinking game. This has never before been like done in the world. It might be a little bit brutal. I think it's going to work. Like, but markets can be brutal. So if you want to learn that way, we can do that. Okay, so now I'm going to go sit with Eddie.
How's it going, guys? My name's Eddie. I'm a product manager at MetaX, working alongside Mike here and the rest of the team, both Consensus and MetaX, to bring forward Adchain. I started out as an intern at MetaX about 2.5 years ago. From there, finally started my full-time last year with the anniversary a couple days ago. So it's been a wild ride. I remember back in the day, Ether, I was like, what the hell is this? I'm just a college student. They definitely don't teach me this in school. So this past year with MetaX has been amazing. And I remember being in the office as an intern when Mike, James, Young, and Amin Solmani, the three authors of the Adchain white paper, when they were coming together, going to the conference room, doing some crazy stuff, and I had no idea what the heck was going on there. So once the white paper came forth, I read through it as many times as possible, and I was just excited for what was to come. So this past year has just been heads down development of what we promised in the white paper. We had beta launch in November. That was pretty interesting because we set it on the Rinkeby testnet. So the thing about the crypto economic model and the game mechanics of TCRs don't really work if you're on the Rinkeby testnet, because everybody can go, tweet their wallet address on Twitter and then get some Rinkeby ETH, right? They can go to our faucet and get some Rinkeby ad token. So people were just applying domains here and there, and they weren't really incentivized to go forth, vote on them, reveal on them. So it's pretty amazing now that we have it in production with real mainnet ad token, with real mainnet Ethereum, that we're able to see these amazing new things that we had no idea. These things that we thought were, like Mike mentioned, the invisible hand and the game mechanics of it, that, yeah, of course, if you're incentivized to vote, everybody's going to vote. 2-3% of people vote as of right now. So it's not people, tokens, right, because it's token-weighted voting. But what we're going to jump into is topics. We're going to discuss some big main points, some thoughts, some questions that we have, and we're just going to go back and forth again, like Mike has said. Definitely feel free to raise your hand, and we'll just converse. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the price to interact with the registry. The registry, if you think about it kind of like an Excel sheet, that the only way you can change statuses within this Excel sheet is to send transactions to the mainnet, right? So every transaction, when we tested it on the Rinkeby testnet, it was like 8, 9, 10 cents of Rinkeby ad token that we had no idea. We were like, oh yeah, once it hits the mainnet, 8 cents is nothing. This thing will be done like in 20 seconds. And as soon as we hit the mainnet and we started applying, it was what MetaMask recommended us to pay was like 30-40 cents, and we're like, hey, this is kind of pricey. And then when we submitted that, we saw that the estimated time was like 20 hours, and we're like, shit, if nobody's going to be willing to pay this much for that amount of time. So luckily, we thought about this in advance, and in our dashboard, we allow for people to convert your token to voting rights, which means that instead of submitting 3 transactions to commit a vote, you only have to submit 1. And we allow people to pre-approve ad token for applications and challenges. So in the Adchain demo in the next hour, we'll be going over that with the whole UI back here. But let's see. We're definitely thinking about new approaches, and Mike right here can jump into this new thing that we thought about, or that people have been jumping into, called delegated voting, where pretty much you as an ad token holder, you shouldn't be going through and committing those votes. You shouldn't be going through and submitting and paying those fees. You shouldn't be going through, and after you do commit the vote with PLCR, you have to go in, as of right now, 5 days later and reveal that vote. So stuff like that is a user experience mess that we try to solve, and as Mike will go into right now with delegated voting, definitely has a lot of promises, but again, it's in theory. With the invisible hand, people will be like, yeah, this is the easiest way for me to vote. I don't have to even think about it, and money will make money for me, kind of thing. So, Mike, if you want to take it away there.
Yeah. So. I think it was when CryptoKitties first happened that suddenly, that was the first time for me in my experience of Ethereum that I really felt the pain of not having a blockchain that scales. Like that was the first time that transaction costs were really becoming somewhat prohibitive. And this week, it's blockchain week, so maybe prices will come down again. But I think like the safe low on Eth gas station is 8 gig away. Anyway, what are the repercussions of this for people who use TCRs? So a few nights ago, I was making some votes on Adchain. We got all sorts of people whose opinions I don't agree with, and so getting my tokens in there to prevent them from doing things that I don't want them to the registry. I had to make 6 votes. I needed to commit 6 votes. It took me half an hour and $1.20 to do this. Now it's mostly sitting around. I was like doing emails while I'm doing it. But yeah, it took me half an hour and over $1 to like have this interaction with the registry. Now for me, that makes sense. I'm fine with that because I have like a good amount of ad token. I have like a lot of exposure to whether ad token works or not. For someone who has a small amount of ad token, like depending on the amount of ad token you have, it just like would never make rational economic sense for you to participate in votes because like the cost of gas, the cost of participating would be greater than like your greatest possible theoretical upside. So that's not great. And then, so we observe even, whales that do have, millions of ad token in their account, we observe most of the ad token sitting dormant. So a coworker of mine at Consensus, Nick Dodson, he is doing this like experiment. It's like an MVP with 0 code of delegated voting. So if you've ever heard of liquid democracy, we think of delegated voting in exactly the same way. So what Nick is doing is you can just send him your tokens. You tell him what your values are, you as an ad token voter, and he will vote on your behalf. Now, obviously, this means you have to do less work, so that's cool. But also, it makes it economically possible for smallholders to participate in these votes. If I've proxied my small amount of ad token to someone who's going to move a large amount of ad token all in a single transaction, the cost of that transaction is amortized over me plus the large holders. So that's cool. It like gives people who otherwise like just economically wouldn't be able to participate, it lets them do so. So eventually Nick's gonna build this out where like, there will be a market for delegates, and it'll, look like the libertarian anarchist fantasy of like a market-driven liquid democracy. So you'll be able to choose. You're basically like electing politicians, if you will, with money and like endowing them with your money and trusting them to do good things with it. So this is an exciting development, which like if it goes places should help us see a lot more ad token actually being put to work. And the hope is that like if you're a rational actor and you're making a consideration, do I just want to like sit on my ad token, like the equivalent of having it in a savings account or whatever with 0 interest rate, or have it be doing productive work where I'm like accruing revenue for it? Having done that, we're hoping that more people will use their ad token. Yes.
Have you thought of like state channels or plasma?
Yeah. So I've definitely thought about plasma. So in practice with state channels, you have to design applications to be channelized. The TCR is like a relatively complex thing. It's, I think, like 1,500 lines of solidity maybe in total, and not like designed for channelization. Like when they got chess working over state channels, that was kind of like a big milestone, But I'm excited about Plasma because Plasma is more of the like kind of generic API for scalability that I want as a programmer. What you have to figure out if you're implementing an application on a Plasma chain is what is your fraud proof, it's called, for like detecting if the validator has been malfeasant in some way. I have a theory. I have to like think harder about it, or maybe y'all should think harder about it, that I think the only fraud proof that you need to put a TCR on a Plasma chain is fraud proofs relating to the validator behaving malfeasantly with the tokens. I actually don't think you need fraud proofs for the registry itself, because if token holders observe that the validator is doing incorrect things with the registry, they can just like detect that using their subjectivity, and as long as they can get their tokens out, they can like regroup somewhere else. So yeah, I've definitely thought about Plasma, for sure.
Mike was talking about you delegating a person, telling them your values, and then just going on cruise control and letting them vote for you. My vision for delegated voting is not really having a person do it, but an app on your phone where you get an alert saying, you have this many tokens, this domain has been applied, do you want to challenge? And from there, you can, I guess, proxy without having to submit transactions, without paying the Ethereum gas fees, at least per transaction, because you already have pre-funded everything. My vision there would be something very seamless where the regular person doesn't have to go and maybe an Ethereum mobile browser or any of that crazy stuff where it's just right away, yes, I want to oppose, or yes, I want to support this domain in question. So again, these are things that will be coming down in the future. Which one works, we'll see. But are we good to close voting there? Cool. Oh, question over here.
Yeah, so this is a 51% attack, which is an attack that I love in Token Curated Registries. So TCRs have very similar security properties to like proof-of-stake blockchains when it comes to that type of economic majority validator attack. So one reason that like proof of work is not sufficiently secure, and I'm going to come back to how this applies to TCRs, proof of work is not sufficiently secure for systemically important global blockchains because it only costs like maybe a few $1 billion to attack Bitcoin, which is a lot for me, but not a lot for some adversaries that might not want Bitcoin to exist. The problem is with proof of work, once they've spent that money, there's kind of like nothing. Your options are limited for like what you can do. You can change your hashing algorithm, but then like this adversary, they're still out there with their hardware. What's exciting about proof of stake in regards to these like economic majority validator attacks is if somebody is doing one of these attacks, in the process of forking, you can destroy their money. Like in the fork, you say, and this money doesn't exist to us, which means you destroy their weapon, which means they have to like reacquire tokens. They have to like do it again. So like Vitalik's hypothesis on this in regards to why this will work out for proof of stake is that sure, an attacker can do this attack, spend a lot of money to like disrupt the operation of the blockchain momentarily, but then like they cut supply in half and the price actually like goes up because the market responds more strongly to half of the supply disappearing. So anyway, same thing with TCRs. If someone does, like I would love for someone to 51% attack Adchain because like I'm gonna make good money and then I'll make even more money after the fork and they'll be left with nothing. So that's how 51% attacks are dealt with in TCRs.
Cool. I'm going to move on to the next topic about how to, or just the complexities of having your tokens across a TCR. So right now, a TCR consists of 3 smart contracts, correct? So we have the main one, which I'm going to talk about in terms of Adchain. Adchain, the PLCR smart contract, and the governance smart contract. For you to interact with Adchain applications and challenges, you simply get your tokens, put them into MetaMask or put your wallet into MetaMask. You request the Adchain registry to withdraw those tokens from your wallet, and in the second transaction, you actually submit the application or submit the challenge. The bad thing, that's not bad, but the bad thing exists when you want to vote, because voting requires you to interact with the PLCR smart contract, and with that, you have to convert your tokens, withdraw them from your wallet, and deposit them into the PLCR smart contract under your right. So as of right now, and when we designed the UI for Adchain, we just wanted to show the user how many tokens they have in their MetaMask, again, in their wallet. And we do show how many tokens they have in terms of voting rights, but the user seeing in the top right only what's available in their MetaMask might think, where are the rest of my tokens? So if you think about it from like a portfolio standpoint, you have cash, right? Maybe your 20% of your portfolio is sitting in cash in case the market goes down, so you can buy back in. You might have them in bonds, you might have them in stocks, and all that crazy stuff split in whichever pie graph, which at the end of the day, still makes 100%, right? So you still, with those, I guess, portfolio apps, you'll still see your 100%. And TCRs as a whole, they should all be able to show the users that 100%. So that's one of the things that we'll be working on in the future, because once again, the user might think, oh, I converted 100 or whatever to my to voting rights, and I don't see that within my wallet. Where is my money? You know, am I actually down after voting? Am I actually down after interacting with the registry for so long? What was all this promise of me making money through this? So that's one of the challenges that we've seen, that we've observed, and that we hope to solve right away.
Yeah, so it's just like there's 3 contracts that your money could be in, and then within those contracts there's like multiple states that your money can exist in. Sometimes it's free for you to withdraw, sometimes it's not, sometimes there's like rewards that you need to claim, et cetera, et cetera. And this is, you know, this is stuff where it's like when we were developing it and, you know, working on testnets and on Rinkeby and stuff, you know, scalability didn't matter, everything was relatively fast. And, you know, just like live and learn, didn't occur to us that we should, you know, implement things like letting users commit to multiple votes in the same transaction, which is totally possible. Letting them reveal for multiple votes in the same transaction. Letting them claim rewards for multiple challenges in the same transaction. So that was just stuff that's like, you know, a program like this had never existed before, and while testing it on, you know, Rinkeby, which is fast, we didn't notice the UX problems that would exist. So actually, if you are a developer, if you're like working on a TCR right now, probably next week, I would say, we're actually going to release PLCR voting 2.0, which will have like multi-commit, multi-reveal, and it reduces the worst case number of transactions to participate in the vote from 6 to 5. So still have a ways to go, but getting there. Yeah, so just that.
All right, we're going to move from viewing your tokens across the registry to actually acquiring those tokens. So one of the biggest problems for us was how can we allow our users who have to have ad token in Adchain to actually interact with the dApp? How do we allow our users to seamlessly purchase ad token and interact with the dApp? Around December through February, or I guess April, our only exchange, being Bittrex, was closed to signups. So we thought about all the new users who might want to interact with the dApp, and Bittrex being the only place to do so. That would definitely be a very big wall, a very big thing that would stop any user from actually interacting with the registry. So about a month ago, Mike connected us with AirSwap, and they were saying how they were going to release their peer-to-peer trading around the same time as us. So right away we were like, hey, you know, can you integrate us somehow? Can you make it as seamless as possible? And they made this amazing widget where anybody can add this like 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code into a website, into a dApp. And if your token is being traded within AirSwap, automatically ask for that amount of token to be purchased and complete the trade in like 3 to 4 steps without ever having to leave the dApp, without ever having to sign up into an exchange, do a KYC element there. At the end of the day, we believe that to be the best user experience that we can provide for our users. So in the top right of the dApp, we have a buy ad token button. You simply, in step 1, ask how many tokens you want to buy. It searches the peers automatically for who's willing to sell and gives you a price. If that price looks good for you, you submit it and it's done. So right away, you can interact with the registry in under 2-3 minutes. Of course, you have to have Ether, and I believe Ether is the only medium of exchange right now between if you want to purchase or sell tokens with AirSwap. But that was a big advance for us, and we were very fortunate for them to be launching around the same time as us so that we didn't have that barrier for new users to interact with our dApp.
Yeah, so solving that is like one thing, but it opens the door to another problem. So thinking about like how you allocate tokens for a TCR is not something I know the answer to, but it's something that like I think going forward people should think more carefully about. So it's like you have these kind of dueling concerns. One is for applicants who need to get onto the list, they need tokens, right? Like they need tokens to make their applications, right? But then in purchasing those tokens, you are like acquiring the same role or duty potentially as token holders who are actually doing the curation work. And so one thing that it's interesting, again, like having Adchain actually live and have it have value and like feeling the emotions of someone with, financial skin in the game. I look at these, 97% of tokens that aren't participating, and it's a little bit intimidating. Like, when is this placid ocean going to turn into a, tsunami of people who start making bad decisions in the registry? And then if you're working on a TCR where perhaps like the assessments that need to be made are more sophisticated, like if you had a TCR of like tokens that are not securities, determining whether something is a security is not something the average Joe can do, right? You need to be like a sophisticated assessor of some sort there. So there have been, so one idea that I heard for this is maybe it isn't actually necessary for applications to be made in the registry's intrinsic token. So like a simple change that I haven't like fully interrogated this idea, but that you could potentially make is applications can be made in Ether, DAI, Bitcoin, US dollars, whatever, right? Token holders have the right to make challenges by putting down matching deposits in that currency. And then only token holders have the right to participate in the voting and claim rewards out of the voting. Now this, again, like whenever you make like small changes in a system like this, it has like ripple effects, and you have to think about the second and third order effects of what you did. But this is one example of like perhaps a simple idea to allow curators, people actually doing curation work, to more tightly control how they release tokens into the public while separating out like the people who just need them to apply. Another idea I heard recently was you could have like a prediction market that's looking at the registry. You could have people participating in prediction markets saying which way they think certain applications are going to go. And if they are consistently winning in the prediction markets, like accrue just some sort of like token, and all this token does is it gives you the right to purchase the curation token. So it's like you'd have to like get through these trials of doing well in the prediction markets in order to win the right to actually like become a curator. So it's kind of like a system where you do like a proof of work in a sense to prove that you would actually be good at the job. So yeah, figuring out how to allocate tokens for TCRs is something that I think in 2018 people are and will think much more carefully about. Like, do you want to, just sell tokens to the public, which we did on Adchain, and we don't know who our token holders are by and large. So yeah, solving how do you get tokens to the people who needs them, like, suggests these other questions about like, who do you want to have tokens? I don't know the answer to this yet.
One thing that I was bouncing off Mike this morning is that the best way, in my vision, to distribute tokens is to give them to those people who really care about it, really care about what's going on there, and cannot become whales, essentially. And one example there is right now there's a DJ top 100 thing list where I believe that people buy their way into. All right, so that if you're the number one DJ, then you become like the headliners at like five or six festivals around the world. And the thing that I was bouncing off Mike is that you would give these tokens to attendees of whatever music festivals or whatever things there, that you only give them very limited amounts and allow them to curate the top 100 DJs or just to make a list of the top DJs, because as of right now, again, it's very binary. But from that, people would say, oh, they would get that token and they would sell it off in the secondary market, and the whales or the DJs will buy those tokens and they'll find force their way back into the list. And another way there is that maybe you don't have one set registry for that, right? So you cut it off into quarters or into months or something. So you have a registry of the top DJs per quarter, and each registry, since it has its own token, is only distributed on a quarter by quarter basis. So for the token token holders, meaning the attendees of these festivals, they don't really care about the secondary market, right? They're just trying to make, have a say in who is a top DJ. So with this, if somebody tries to buy their way in and do all that stuff, they would have to do it consistently, quarter after quarter after quarter, which again, there is a way for them to do that, but through these efforts of creating new registries quarterly, monthly, weekly, something that, again, the curators don't really care about that. For them, it's just a new token, right? The quarter token. They don't really care, and they really just care about who's the top DJ. So that's one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think Mike has some input on that.
Yeah, so I think that like this basic idea of having like an ephemeral TCR that disappears and renews itself every 3 months or whatever, kind of speaks to like you could think more abstractly about just like how do you make it less attractive to do nothing but speculate on a TCR's tokens. Now, obviously, like the upside in this token, if you do a good job of curating, is like part of what makes the system work. Without that incentive, it doesn't work. But what we don't want, or what's not really helpful, is people who just buy the tokens and then sit on them, who don't care what actually happens to the registry. So, one thing you could do to make an asset less attractive to speculate on is have it disappear every 3 months. You could build into the system, means where like if the tokens are not being used to do curation work, perhaps they decay over time according to some decay function. You could another thing you could do is you could restrict where tokens are allowed to go. So again, like you need them to be able to go to the market, otherwise TCRs don't work. They're crypto economic systems. But one thing you could do is like, say you can only transfer the tokens between, the registry contracts, the actual curation system, and then this one single sale contract where like the only way to move tokens, you can only move the tokens from out of the system into this sale contract. Everyone has to share one sale contract, and then if anyone wants to buy from this sale contract, they can do that, but then the tokens go right back into the curation system just under a new person's control. It's another thing I've been thinking about. There's a lot of work to do on this front and a lot of thinking to be done. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, what if there's somebody who doesn't want to be on the registry? So they're never going to list themselves, and if someone else tries to list them, they will acquire tokens to try to challenge themselves off of the list. So if they are needed, so there's generally no incentive to apply a listing that you yourself wouldn't directly benefit from. Like in the restaurants example, like in general, why would I apply some other restaurant? It's not going to make me more money. But so let's say that you're a conscientious token holder who's trying to like bootstrap their system, right? And so you want to get some. Yeah, so if the US government has a secret airport that they don't want listed, I love this example, then the US government is going to have to like keep, let's play this through. The US government is going to have to keep buying tokens to like keep challenging that listing off of the list. And maybe token holders are fine with that. It's not the worst outcome. They keep making money and they're somewhat exposing the existence of something that the government wants to deny.
Technically anybody can go in and challenge, so they would buy the tokens to challenge themselves. But within voting, if the rest of the token holders want it, then they would support it in, right? So they would continuously challenge, and it would still be in registry, right? Because once a listing is in registry and it's challenged, it goes to voting commit, right? The first phase of PLCR, but it's still considered in registry. So yeah, a 51% attack would be the only way, and from that, everybody else would be rich, and then the registry will fork, so decentralized at the end of the day, yeah. All right, good. All right, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is how do we create a setting for token holders to converse whether an application or a listing that's already in it is good or bad. Within the Adchain registry, about 2 months before launch, we thought about this crazy thing where everybody who applies and everybody who challenges should give reasoning as to why. So that the rest of the token holders who might not be the most intensively ad ops people who can really determine whether a publisher is fraudulent or not, so that with the application, the challenge, there's some reasoning that will start the conversation so that the rest of the ad token holders know who to ask and know where to point and where to convene when talking about that. So when a domain is applied to the registry, we require a 15-character application reasoning. The application reasoning, at least 15 characters, not at max. Within that application reasoning, you as an applicant who is incentivized to tell the rest of the community, hey, I'm staking 1,500 ad token, which right now is the min deposit. I'm staking 1,500 ad token. This is why I should not be challenged. This is why I should be admitted into the registry. Maybe here's some proof. Challenge me if you want, but hopefully the rest of the people will be on my side and support my application. Upon them doing that and upon them submitting their application to the registry, we automatically create a Reddit post within our subreddit, Adchain registry. Within that subreddit, we create this thread where anybody can interact via Reddit or via our DApp. And it's cross-platformed, live chat kind of thing where you can talk to the rest of the community and give your reasonings. And right away, we have that chat next to where you commit your vote. So if you're about to commit a vote, you should at least reference the chat as to why, because maybe there's some people saying you should. This is some proof, however. But what that asks though is that anybody now can chat within that, right? So I can say, yeah, I'm about to stake 1 million ad token to support. Everybody should jump on my side. And the biggest problem there is that are they a troll? Do they really have that much ad token? So I know there's a lot of efforts being done there where one can verify their Reddit username or just whichever medium of conversation we have, where one can verify that user profile with the amount of token they own. So this will be coming out soon, I believe. It's maybe just a thought, maybe it'll be coming out soon. But I think that'll be a really great effort for the community to say, hey, I'm a whale, listen to me, which at the end of the day, you don't want to sway people side to side, because if you're a whale, you care and you have the most at stake with the registry, right? So you can really mute the trolls that will persist from the threads. So that's something really cool, and we're really excited to see that happen.
Right. So just to be devil's advocate, that to me kind of sounds like you're tacking stuff on because you don't have faith in the blind voting system. For me, the blind voting system is supposed to do the exact opposite of what you discussed. Hey, I'm about to dump a whole bunch of tokens on the side. Everybody go with me. That basically means it's totally becoming about profit, and any of the actual real premise of voting just went the heck out the window. Why is this a good thing?
So I think it's actually preferable if the system encourages users to converge towards 100% consensus. So let's say we lived in a world. So if we lived in a world where token holders could not communicate whatsoever, I think that actually wouldn't be ideal, because in theory they all have the same goal. In theory, to curate a registry of high quality. Maybe they have slightly different opinions on what that means. If one token holder is doing research, doing work, and discovers something pertinent about the listing, I think we want them to be able to share that with other token holders. I think we should try to get towards 100% convergence. That should give us more confidence that the system is working. If someone is saying, hey, I'm about to whale out 1 million tokens on this side, and doesn't give a reason as to why, that's not a healthy token holding community. That's potentially not going to make good decisions. So yeah, that's my opinion on that particular question. I think that helping people come to convergence is actually a good thing. In regards to the question of how do you figure out whose opinion you should pay attention to, again, individuals don't matter here, tokens matter. And so one thing that Nick Dodson, the delegated voting guy, is also working on is a chat system where you can just filter by how many tokens people have. So you can say like, only show me the comments of people who have actual skin in the game. And you can do this just by like signing messages from an Ethereum account that holds tokens. So that's an interesting thing that I think will be useful. But then in general, like going back to another meta question or an abstract question, like, so earlier on in this process, earlier on in the TCR process, I was like so hyped up on just like financial incentives, making people do all the work. I'm like, we don't have to build anything, you know, like, because they're just going to have financial incentive to figure out how to do this. I think we observe in practice that it is important to provide some structure as to like how token holders can do their social consensus process and how they can like do discovery as to what is a good or a bad listing. So I think like a big question that anybody doing a TCR has to ask themselves is, what kind of information should token holders desire to get from applicants? And how can we like expose this to users such that, expose it to users both on the application side, because they have like a treacherous path to go through where like a lot of applicants could like fall out of the funnel if the application process is very onerous. But then also thinking about your token holders, how do you expose this information to them and suggest that maybe if things are missing there, that should be a reason for caution. So I think thinking about the entire pipeline of how applications and how the diligence process works for any TCR, it's going to be different depending on what you're curating. How you do diligence on like good restaurants versus buildings that are earthquake rated is very different. But that's like, I think, a user experience, a very important user experience problem that you should not punt on or assume away when you're trying to make a product out of a TCR. Yeah, so Simon says that like consensus happens off-chain. There's a lot of consensus work that happens off-chain prior to people actually taking actions on-chain. And he mentioned Civil's constitution system. So for a while, I actually thought that constitutions for TCRs were silly, because I was just like, well, they're not enforced in the code. But now I'm very much coming around to the idea that like establishing strong Schelling points at the outset of getting a curation community together is like perhaps very valuable. So even if you have a constitution, even of course it's not enforced in the code, but just having that focal point for a community to make decisions around, I think can be super useful. Going to the point of how much consensus work happens like in the off-chain social abstract world that we can't control. One thing we've thought about for improving Adchain is maybe we shouldn't even try to have a chat system, because like creating compelling and useful social networks and like places where ideas can freely flow is like hard. Like there are whole companies that are built around that. Maybe we should just be more aggressive in like directing token holders towards like, go to the Adchain subreddit. Reddit is clearly a platform that works for people. So yeah, figuring out like how do you help token holders do social consensus is an important thing to think about.
Awesome. We're going to move into the discussion about governance, parameters of a TCR. As of right now, with the 1.0 implementation of TCRs, which Adchain is a part of, we have 12 parameters, 6 of them being what we call core parameters that have to do with the registry and the creation of the registry, with the other 6 being the governance parameters. So those are kind of like the meta parameters where you have to pay that higher fee to change one of the other parameters. So at the end of the day, these parameters and this governance allows for a TCR to work as a decentralized autonomous organization, so that there's no central governing body that dictates how much it should cost or how long it should be. When we were doing research on what parameters to launch with the Adchain registry, of course, there's no data and there's no proof. So we made a giant list of pros and cons, and we'll see what works best. As of right now, we have an application fee of 1,500 ad token, which is roughly 80, 70 bucks. Maybe we would need to increase that so that the voting rewards for people are a bit higher, and maybe they're more incentivized now to vote because they're saying, oh my gosh, this is a $10 pot versus $1 million pot for them to spend their time doing when they have a job, when they have kids, family, friends to interact with instead of the registry. One of the big things there is people have been asking for a week-long voting system, whereas maybe Monday through Wednesday are application days, and Thursday through Friday are commit days, Friday through Sunday are reveal days, and then the week restarts after that. Our approach to that was setting 7-day application periods. If somebody is to be challenged within that 7-day application period, it would automatically move to the voting commit phase. The voting commit phase right now is set to 5 days, so anybody who has ad token is incentivized to go within those 5 days and commit their votes. With that commit, they have to go in again 5 days afterwards to reveal their votes. So we discussed delegated voting and how that can probably solve that user experience mess too. But at the end of the day, we're slowly going there, and we're collecting a lot of data that we'd like to present to you at a later time.
So one thing, what's been interesting about going to production with a TCR is like we had this set of things that we thought would be important, and then going to production has surfaced which of them actually are important. And one thing that I got many things wrong. One thing I definitely got wrong was so parameterization or governance of these registries is it is at a theoretical level it's broken. The parameterizer in a TCR, the reason I say it's theoretically broken is that it's possible to use the parameterizer to destroy the TCR. So the way that works is you can make a proposal to set the application period to be 1 million years, right? And then your TCR is frozen, and you can't actually unstick it. So I was worried about that because theoretically it doesn't work. This is a thing where in practice, actually I'm not worried about it at all, because it's just, so the application fee to apply a website is 1,500 ad tokens, 70 or 80 bucks. The fee or the deposit to make a change to the governance parameters is 500,000 ad token, which is $20,000 or something. It's just so expensive. It would be so risky to try to pull off a move like that. I actually, in practice, find that I don't worry about it at all. Practically, it works, I think, quite well, at least so far, knock on wood. But even though it's theoretically broken, so I got kind of depressed 2 weeks ago because I was thinking oh man, all of these assumptions that I made, some of them aren't exactly working out the way I thought that they would. But then I got over that depression, and I was like, okay, I just need to refocus on how to tweak these things and improve them. So it's been good identifying what's actually important with TCRs in practice. Some of the theoretical stuff it doesn't matter if in some far out edge case the thing can be broken, if in practice it's totally unlikely that it'll ever happen. Governance turns out to be, so far at least, one of those areas where I was worried about it theoretically, but practically it seems just fine. You just have to make it expensive.
All right, Mike, we have 5 minutes left. Is there a topic that you want to really focus on?
Anyone in the audience?
Have you thought about using a delegated democracy or liquid democracy TCR?
Yeah, that's exactly what Nick Dodson is currently working on building out. I think that's the ultimate end game for how participation in these things should work. So yeah, more than thinking about it, we're trying to do it. Yeah, that's what the parameterizer does. The fees are one of the parameters that can be changed. Yeah. Yeah. So it costs $20,000 currently to make a proposal to change the governance parameters. You could make a $20,000 deposit to propose changing it to 10,000. You can do that, and if you win, you're going to get your 20,000 back, and then in the future it'll only be 10,000. So yeah.
You looked at TCRs where the level of expertise to decide whether something is good or bad requires so many years of detailed technical experience. For example, what give it triple to the TCR?
Yeah, so there's a few ways that you can approach this. Some I kind of touched on earlier. One I didn't touch on, which may turn out to be a thing, is so you have some complex topic. I'm not smart enough to make an assessment. Most average people aren't smart enough to make an assessment. Say buildings that are earthquake safe is your TCR. I can't assess that. However, I probably am competent to assess whether somebody else is competent. Like I can look at someone's resume, say, oh, they've worked as an engineer, they have a PhD, I can check their references, okay, yeah, they've worked as a civil engineer, whatever. As an average Joe, I can do that. And so one thing you could do is have two registries. One is a traditional TCR of sophisticated assessors. And then once you have that, you can just do like one assessor, one vote to populate the other registry. The other registry is not necessarily a token curated registry. It's like a multi-sig registry kind of. So that's one potential solution for that.
Have you thought about TCRs for like registries that don't necessarily have the demand to apply to the list, like a blind list, for example?
Yeah, I've thought about it, and like so far I just don't see them working. Yeah, because like TCRs work in part because there's incentive to like be on a whitelist. There's no incentive to like self-apply to a blacklist. Maybe someone will find a way to make that work, but so far I haven't in my own mind.
I think Consensus had a blog post about having tests for people participating in ad sales. Like, have you thought about applying similar to that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, a very you could do so like. You deploy a TCR. At time 0, you have all the tokens. You have 100% of the supply. You can apply whatever like KYC rules you want before giving tokens out. What I'm kind of interested in is in figuring out ways to identify who is competent to participate in the curation without having to do like an off-chain KYC process that would ultimately be centralized. So that's why I'm interested in kind of this idea I heard about earlier where you have people participating in prediction markets, and winning in the prediction markets gives them the right to purchase the curation tokens. That, may have problems with it in the end, but yeah, totally. It may not be wise to just like let absolutely anyone buy your tokens.